Hey, this is Jonathan. Thanks for joining me on the call tonight. Last month I went 30 minutes over the call, so I'm going to jump right in and get to it tonight. I have a lot of questions. Uh, Starting out here, I had a whole bunch of marketing questions, and so I'm just going to group them all together and talk about some general information here as we go. And I may not say the question necessarily. Let's start first with one of the first questions, and that was about printing. So who do I use for printing? Who do I recommend? Uh, and then there was a couple other questions related to printing. So let me give you a little bit of background here. When you go to print, whether it's door hangers or tentfold cards or postcards or whatever the case may be, generally, and some of these facts may be just slightly off, but historically, I've always had in mind that there's a breaking point at around 10,000 pieces. So then that means that depending on the printer that you're working with, they have different types of machines. So some have the variable print machines that can do one-off prints where you could give them a spreadsheet and a marketing piece, and in that marketing piece they can insert in the prospect's name on demand, so they can print 10,000 pieces with one print run with 10,000 different leads' names on that print run, so they could customize that postcard as they go. So those types of print runs really require specific types of equipment. And then if you get into, which is what most people do, printing where you're just printing the same thing, big volume of the exact same thing, then that type of printing below 10,000 is most efficient on a different type of machine than, say, printing 100,000. So again, some of my facts could be slightly off. I've learned some of this stuff over years, and I know the technology is changing. But that's what I've always had in mind. So generally, when I do small print runs, just small stuff, I need hundreds or thousands. For speed, a lot of times I'll just go to a company that I use locally that can do a lot of big printing, or sometimes I'll just submit it over to this company here that I've got up on my screen, which is gotprint.net. I've been really happy with these guys. They're really fast, and the quality's been good. I've never had any problems, and the prices seem to be good. I'm sure there's a million opinions on who to use, but I personally like GotPrint, and so I've used them quite a bit. And then for my bigger print runs, like I said here locally, I'll do it. So bigger print run could mean for me even thousands. It could even mean 5,000, which I would comfortably send 5,000 pieces to GotPrint as well. So the only downside sometimes to going with a printing company that's not in your local market is the bigger the print run, the more boxes you're going to get, thus the more shipping, and it tends to mess up the pricing a bit. So I think you want to have a local printer that you have a good relationship with, and then you also want to have a printer like GotPrint that you can go to for quick stuff that can just turn around. Like, for example, these guys just seem to be about the cheapest there are for business cards. And I don't use business cards, but I use a version of business cards for certain type of marketing that we do. So I would suggest that you look around. Now, if you do big print runs, and I think of stuff over 10,000, especially getting to 100, 200,000 pieces into the hundreds of thousands, you absolutely want to shop the job. The amount of money you can save from printer to printer is significant. And going to some of the big printing shops that have the massive printing presses can save you just a fortune. So when it comes to printing, you definitely need to shop around. The big print runs, you need to shop them quite a bit, because there is a very, very significant difference in what you'll get quoted, and that's going to be based on the type of equipment that they have. And some of the equipment for the massive print runs is very expensive, but if you go to the right person, you can save a ton of money. So summing up a couple other questions too, something that's really interesting to do that I like when I submit printing pieces is, let's say that you go with business cards, or I use a lot of postcards. So right here on GotPrint, I use a lot of postcards. Basically, you just upload your design, and then on the checkout process, you can do a couple things. So here's where I'm going with this. I'm not a big fan of brochures, for no other reason than I just don't care about them. I tend to like using a postcard because they don't have to be opened. They can just be flipped over. So something that's kind of interesting that you can do with postcards is, normally you think of a postcard as something that's going to have a return address on the back side of it, and you're going to mail it out to a prospect or maybe to your client base. And so there's a whole nother possibility for postcards, and that is when you use them as 5 or 7 rounds and you leave them on doors, or maybe when you're knocking on doors, you're handing something out, or maybe if you're walking an area with a lot of commercial properties and you're walking in to see if they need service when their contract's going to expire, if you have opportunity to bid on the property, it's nice to have a leave behind. Instead of a brochure, I like to use a postcard. Something you can do to class up a postcard is on the checkout process at Got Print. At a lot of places you can do this, especially if you're going to go to a local printer that's a bigger printer. And I would look at in fact, going back to my original topic, rather than just finding a small local printer, I'd go really search out somebody good in your market and I'd create a relationship with them. I wouldn't just bounce around. In fact, if I was going to pay just slightly more, slightly less to go somewhere else, I wouldn't do it. I'd stay with who I'm working with and build a relationship. The bigger you get, the more important it's going to be to get turnaround. And by sending that vendor volume, you can get better turnaround. And likewise, one thing I've found is that, of course, if they think you're going to give them a lot of business, they're willing to do a whole lot more for you. One more thing. If you're going to go shop around, you might even ask questions about, can they acquire lists? Do they have relationships with list brokers? Because if you get into cold mailers where you're mailing postal mail out to leads that you have never called into your company, then it's going to be important to acquire a mailing list, and to be able to just ask a printer to help you with that is really convenient. So look for somebody of size, look for somebody that you can build a relationship with. So back to what I was talking about classing up postcards. You can do this here, you can do it with the big printers I'm referring to. I like to use these as handouts, as essentially mini brochures that don't have to be opened. So on checkout, you can gloss both sides. So there's an option you can select, and basically it'll put a shiny clear coat on both sides of the postcard. Now this is absolutely something you do not want to do if you're going to put these through the mail. You can gloss the front side of your postcard in the mail, but do not gloss the back side, because the way the post office runs these cards, their machines apply something to the back side of the card. It's ink based, and so what will happen on these glossy cards, sometimes if that gets messed up, they'll be undeliverable. So this is really critical that you don't gloss the back side of your card. So if we're looking at a picture here, see if I can bring one. I can't bring one up, but if you can see these little sample postcards right here on the front side here, where it just has your main image, then and there's no postal information, gloss that side. And when you flip the card over on the back side, depending on the side of the card, it'll affect where the placement of the return address is, where the placement of the stamp is and such, and the address is. That'll be affected by the size of the postcard. And so on the back side, that's where they run it through this machine that gets into carrier routing and sorting it. And so if you gloss that, they can't always ink it. And the problem with that is it can result in a ton of unreturned or undelivered mail. And if you don't send your postcards bulk mail, if you don't send first class and you send bulk mail, then you'll never even get them back, because only first class mail in the United States comes back to you. And so you won't even know that thousands and thousands of your pieces potentially never were even delivered. Sometimes the post office will try to append a little sticker to it, but when you're talking about bulk class, they only put so much effort into this. So protect yourself and never gloss the back of a card that is being mailed through the postal system. However, when you're doing what I'm describing here and you're using it as a handout, gloss the back side. I think it classes it up quite a bit. So you go glossy front and back. The other thing that's interesting that you can do with the postcard that I really think then starts to shift the appearance away from a postcard is that very same thing. Gloss the front and back, and then on checkout on, for example, Got Print here, you can pay several extra bucks, and it varies based on the volume, and you can have the corners of your postcard rounded. So if you've ever seen someone maybe that's handed you a business card and they rounded off the corners of their business card, it just immediately makes it look better. You can do that exact same thing with a postcard. And you can round the edges, gloss it front and back. It makes for a wonderful handout. You can, in postcards, of course, when you shop around, they come in all kinds of sizes. So I find these to be just fantastic handouts when you're door knocking, when you're meeting with a client. And so consider those two options when you're, like here's what I was looking for. Down here, they've got wide postcards, You can see here they've got all kinds of different sizes. So that you can go with, they've got postcards essentially they're the size of a full sheet of paper, 8 by 11. So postcards aren't just the 5 by 7s or some of the other smaller sizes. You can do a lot of creative things here and use these as creative marketing pieces. All right, a couple other questions about marketing pieces had to do with actually sending them and which ones work. So really I think most marketing pieces work if you're sending them to the right people and they have the right message on them. So the size of the postcard, if it's a postcard versus a letter versus a tent mailer versus whatever, they call that the media. That really is somewhat insignificant in the broad scheme of things, meaning that no one thing just happens to always work. Really, media becomes significant depending on who you're mailing to and what you're trying to accomplish. And so it varies. Like, for example, I tend to like the postcard I was just describing, the postcard concept, as a handout over a brochure. That's just my personal preference. It's easy for guys to deal with. It holds up. It doesn't, crinkle and get messed up and then look kind of beat up when you actually hand it over to the client. It does a nice job of maintaining its shape. It just looks really nice and professional. So I think in that scenario, that's a nice handout. I think postcards are great for mailers, but I don't like postcards for mailing to commercial properties. But I think they're a nice mailer to a homeowner. I like them even better as mailers to homeowners that you already have as clients, because with your logo at the top, a lot of times they'll take a look at your stuff because you've already got built-in trust. Whereas sometimes you have to be a little bit more sneaky about it with the lead. And so I'm a big fan of, it's more work and more complicated, but hand addressing envelopes and putting a real 44-cent stamp on the envelope. I personally think pretty much the best mailer to a prospect is one that looks like a greeting card. Now, oftentimes they'll call that a tentfold card. So basically imagine a Hallmark card that you go to the store and you buy, and it's got it opens up. It's a greeting card. So just imagine a greeting card in a greeting card size envelope, hand addressed with a real stamp and with a return address on it that doesn't say your business name, that maybe just has your address, and that's it. And maybe your last name, or maybe not, though, because the whole point of going to the effort of mailing something that looks like a greeting card with a real 44-cent stamp on it is that nobody gets a greeting card in the mail that's hand addressed and just throws it in the trash. I mean, they think they're getting invited to something. They think it's a friend. They think it's something. They just assume they know that person because of the factors that go into play: the size, the shape, their perception of what it is based on past experience, the hand addressing, all that together plays into something that's nearly impossible for the person receiving it to actually throw it away without looking at it. And so further than that, if I was sending that out when I sent that, and if I was doing it, I wouldn't put a big blatant bold advertisement on the outside of the card. So think about it when they open up the card. So if this is the card right here, if you can see this picture, it says Jazz Festival. If I had something on the outside of this tentfold card when they pulled it out of the envelope, it would not be blatant marketing. It would be something attractive. It would be something that mimics the whole invitation, the whole thank you, like it looks like a Hallmark card at some level. And when they open it, that's where my marketing message would be. I'd still consider a headline, or maybe it's a handwritten note that's photocopied off thousands and thousands of times and looks like you hand wrote it but didn't really. So that would be pretty much my first choice. It's one of the more expensive choices, but it would be my first choice if you want something that actually works. Something else regarding this when you mail it, something to think about. It doesn't matter what you're mailing, a letter, and again, this is US based, what I'm about to say, so I couldn't say for Canada and other countries, but when you're putting your mail in or one thing to notice, and I'd highly recommend, if you're not doing this, start collecting your junk mail, the good junk mail, and throw it in a file cabinet and just keep it. But start looking at, when you get your mail, how it's laying in the mailbox. This is really important. So look at how your postcards are in there as you receive them. Look at the letters, how they're in there. So pull them out and just notice where the address is. And notice how it's placed in your mailbox. When it's a postcard, notice again which side's placed in the postcard. Is it the back side that only has that the entire postcard's consumed with print, or is it the other side where it's got the address, your address on it, because they were mailing it to you? Look at that and notice the characteristics of how it's laying in your mailbox. Notice when you pick up the mail, what's the first thing you read? Also think about when you're sorting your mail. Are you just sorting through it and throwing some of it into a pile that you think you're going to look at later and the rest goes straight into the trash can? Also notice how you make your decision on if you're going to read that. So do you read a headline? Is it a color? Is there something about it? What are those things? What are the factors that help you quickly sift through your mail and junk part of it and hold part of it that you're going to investigate further to see if it's something you're interested in? Start paying attention to that kind of stuff, and you might watch what other people do, because this is a really good lesson in trying to figure out what you want to do when you're mailing. So when you get into these huge numbers of mailers, and let me sidestep here. I see a lot of people that go out and they do 1,000 mailers and postcards and they get 0 responses. And so they think it doesn't work. Well, it does. They just did something wrong. And it could be a million different factors. And so my point is here, you've got to eliminate every single possible thing that makes that campaign fail. So these are things you want to think about, because you want to make sure that you've taken into account the way how that postcard's laying or that letter's laying, or when they open the letter, when they pull it out, what's the first thing they see? Do they open their letter and from the address side, or they flip it over to the back of the envelope, open it that direction, and then pull that piece out? So there's lots of factors you take into account to give yourself a better chance of not being thrown into the trash. So I'm not going to say much more about that, but just think about that concept. So finally, on media here, I would say that there's no one thing that works better than others, except for, I think, this tentpole card is huge. In commercial, I think there's nothing better, and it's expensive, than overnight mail. So what looks like a FedEx package to whoever you're talking about. Obviously, you can't broadcast thousands of those out unless you're a big operation, but you can at least send a lot of those out to the top 100 clients that you just want to get. And you can just go after them and after them and after them, and intend to basically, be willing to spend some money to get them, because you've identified the 100 clients you want to get. There's a guy, if you never read the book, it's a great book. It's by Chet Holmes, called The Ultimate Sales Machine, and he has the saying of the Dream 100. And when he was growing some of his companies that he worked for way back when, he basically would figure out this Dream 100. This is a concept that may not be unique to him, but I've heard it before. But he would figure out, okay, I'm taking over this new business, or I'm taking over this new segment of the company. How are we going to, as fast as possible, turn this company into something? So he would identify the Dream 100 clients that they wanted. These are the 100 clients that could bring in the most revenue to the company, possibly the most profit, and could have the most changing effect on the business. And he would go after these top 100 clients. And he wouldn't just mail them a piece. He wouldn't just, send them one or two things and stop. He would, every 2 weeks, every month, they'd make sales calls. They'd mail mailers. So this kind of concept is where, if you identified the 100 commercial properties you were just determined to own, you'd spend the money to find out who the purchasing manager is. You'd spend the money to find out who makes the decision. You might have somebody on your team cold call all 100 companies, ask the secretary who they need to talk to about this specific topic, do some background research, build your list of 100. Then you'd FedEx or overnight mail or 2-day mail these guys a letter, and then you'd mail them something else, and then maybe you just keep mailing them. You wouldn't stop. You would do it for 2 years, and you'd periodically make cold calls, and you'd do everything you can to eventually own these properties, these top 100 that you want. That kind of mindset only works if, when you go into marketing, you say, we're going to not do 2 pieces or 3 pieces and stop. We're going to keep going. We're going to be dedicated. And so in terms of thinking through this, it's a lot less intimidating to think you're going to go after 100 and you're going to spend money on 24 different mailers over 2 years, and you're going to make cold calls to 100 different people. That, from a financial standpoint, is far less intimidating than going in and thinking we're going to do this to 5,000 people, because the cost is so great to do that. So test this at a small scale. Start with 100 people that you know perfectly fit what you're doing and would be attracted to you, and try to get them and learn your marketing techniques that way and apply all these different things. And the reason, what made me think to tell you that is, when you're doing something like that, it might be tentfold cards, it might be overnight mailers. Next month it might be a handwritten letter. A month from now it might be a who knows what. It could be a baseball in a box. It could be anything. But think about changing up your media and always using the media that best fits the situation. So another question I got had to do with door hangers, which I'm a fan of door hangers for the residential market if done right. The problem, my biggest complaint about door hangers is not Some people say they don't work. I disagree. They do work if done right. At least that's what I've seen. Now they work better at different times of the year. So this isn't an advanced question here. I mean, well, what I mean by this is sort of common knowledge possibly, but if you put them out the wrong time of year, they're obviously not going to work. If you put them out while it's raining, if you haven't observed that before, they don't work very well when that's happening. If you put it out on a really cold day and you're trying to market for mowing, a lot of times the results are better on a warmer day. So there are factors that go into it, but a lot of the factors really have come down to the message on the piece, the attractiveness, the look of the piece. It doesn't have to be attractive, but the look of the piece. Where I'm going with this is some people discredit door hangers, and I'm a fan of door hangers, especially when used strategically, but I find door hangers to be highly challenging because it's very hard to find good door hanger companies. So I actually got a couple questions about door hangers, so I'm going to just say a couple quick things about it. If you do door hangers, I think you have to commit to spying on the companies that are doing your door hangers for you. I think if you're not going to do that, don't bother with it. So what I suggest, if you haven't ever tried this, when you hire the door hanger company, tell them that we're going to work with you, but here's the deal. The day of, you need to FedEx or fax us a map with the area that you're going to be putting in door hangers circled. And then you're going to go out and you're going to spot check those neighborhoods. And every day they put out door hangers for you, they've got to send you this. If they won't do it, don't work with them. It's not worth it. I can tell you from personal experience. And then go spot check them. Drive a few of the streets, make sure they're putting them out. And if not, take a couple pictures, email them over, and bring it up. The door hanger companies may not like you, but who cares? This is a lot of money, and a lot of them are lousy. And so I just think this is the only way to do door hangers. Now, I do like doing door hangers yourself, but it's hard to justify because the door hanger companies are putting 2 or 3 door hangers on the door, and that's how they're getting the cost down. And you're already in the business of having the same types of laborers that put out door hangers. These guys are working for your company, so it's not that that these door hanger companies have a tremendous amount of additional efficiencies that you don't have. So my point is that there's no way you can go put out just your door hanger on doors at the same cost at the same cost as basically a guy that's putting out 3. It's just your costs are gonna be a little bit higher, and then he's putting out 3 that he's getting paid from 3 different companies to help offset the expense. There's just no way that you can put them out as cost effectively. However, I still like it, especially as fillers when the guys are slow, and especially at the beginning of the year. I've got a question from a guy. I'm going to talk about H-2B visa here just very, very briefly in a little bit. And I've got a question from a guy that was asking about bringing in visa laborers a bit early before the season and having them put out door hangers. That is an excellent strategy. I recommend that exact strategy. So if you bring in a portion of your company's visa labor, I like to use that labor while they're waiting to do your door hangers for you. It's not as cost effective as a good door hanger company, but it's a way to utilize them. And then you can also really target them. Door hanger companies tend to like to do more bulk putting out the door hangers in bigger areas. There's only such a fine market that they'll go down to and put out the door hangers. Whereas when you're doing it yourself, you can really target more closely the neighborhoods you all actually serve, the streets you actually serve. So there's some advantages. So along the door hanger concept, the way I think to do this is, I've talked before about 5 and 7 rounds, putting them out on the streets that each time your guys are mowing or fertilizing or doing pest control or whatever the case may be, they put a door hanger on the 5 or 7 houses around their property, and they do this roughly every 3 weeks. That's my recommendation. And you should vary these door hangers over time. They can be glorified postcards sometimes. They could be letters in an envelope sometimes. They could be door hangers sometimes. But you vary these up sometimes, and you vary the message, and you put these on the doors around the properties you serve roughly about every 3 weeks. And the way to protect them, and this was one of the questions, is what I like to do is you buy big clear Tupperware containers, and you put all the marketing pieces in them, and you slide that under the seat of the truck. And the guys basically bring these back into the office periodically, and they get restocked, lid gets put on them, they slide back under the truck. So basically all that happens is when one of the guys on the crew, whether it's the second or third or fourth guy on the crew, depending on how big of a crew you're running, finishes, first guy done, basically just opens the passenger door of the truck, reaches down, slides this clear container out from under the seat, grabs a handful of these postcards, puts them on the 7 doors around, or if it's going to be quite a while he's waiting, he puts them on the whole street. He comes back, puts the remaining door hangers back in the Tupperware, puts the lid on, slides it back under the seat. Keeps them from getting bent up, tore up. They don't go in glove boxes. They don't go in pockets on seats. It's the best way to stay organized on that. Also, if you've not heard me mention it before, the very best way to do door hangers, I believe, is to have the company on the same page. So I think just a general concept internally is to always have the company marching to essentially the same goal, moving in the same direction. So it's kind of a couple examples. If you're going to rotate the cut at your properties, and this is a little easier said than done, but it's far easier to tell everybody we're mowing all lawns this week horizontally and next week vertically and then diagonally, and the whole company's doing the same thing. Now, I clearly know that in this mowing example that when you're mowing, you can't always on all properties shift directions on mowing all 4 directions, because certain properties only mow properly certain ways, and you'll end up getting calls from clients because based on how the sod was laid and rolled and such, if you mow certain directions, sometimes on properties, you'll get more of a bouncing effect and more scalping. And so obviously there's times this doesn't work, but on an awful lot of properties, you could truly shift all 4 directions. So why not have the whole company mowing the same direction every single week? Then one guy can't say, oh, I didn't know, or I was confused, or I just got confused, and that's why I mowed it vertically for the last 4 weeks in a row. No, the whole company's mowing vertically today and horizontally next week. How could you be confused? It clears it up. It takes away excuses. Same concept I like with door hangers. The entire company's doing door hangers on Mondays and Tuesdays this week, Wednesdays and Thursdays next week, Friday on the 3rd week, and then we start over on the 4th week. And you just roll through the 52 weeks of the year on this 3-week rotation, and everybody's doing them on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then the 3rd week, Friday. Pretty easy. That way, on Tuesday, which on week 1, where you're putting them out on Mondays and Tuesdays, on Tuesday, when one of the crews decides they don't want to do it for that day, and you confront them, they can't say, oh, we didn't know, because we just got confused on a rotation. We thought this was the week we were doing it on Fridays. You just take away all the excuses. So I like to apply as much of that type of thinking to your business where everybody's kind of doing the same thing. So that's a great way to do door hangers, that with the Tupperware that I was talking about, to keep them from being beat up. It's a really nice way to manage that and put those out. So I got a question about receipts. So how do you manage receipts? So a couple quick ideas. These are quick ideas. If you're in a more established business, you probably have your own system for this, but maybe this will be helpful. A couple quick ideas. If you use paper route sheets and you're not using mobiles, then I like clipboards. So every day you put the route sheets on the clipboards. On the back of the clipboard, get one of those pencil bags that you used to use when you were in elementary school, and that held your pencils and pens and erasers. Take that pencil bag, buy some Velcro strips, stick it on the back of the clipboard. So every day when you hand out clipboards, there is a clear Velcro, a clear pencil bag about the size of the clipboard, Velcroed to the back of the clipboard, and on the front's the route sheet. The guys put their receipts in the Velcro or in the pencil bag, and when they turn in the clipboard, you get back the receipts. I think that's a great way to make sure receipts don't get thrown around in the truck, stuck in wallets, never make it back to the office. From there, just from my years of being in business and such, we use expense reports for anybody that doesn't use company credit cards. So if you do an expense report, then when you turn in the expense report, what's interesting approach is to get the brown manila folders and write everybody's name on them and the month, hand out the folders at the beginning of the month, and then, or whatever the time period is, what they do is they stick their receipts into that folder as they go. They can keep it in the glove box of the truck, they can keep it in their laptop bag, whatever the case may be. And then at the end of the month, if they put together an expense report, if you do it that way, or if they turn in a credit card statement, when they produce that report, they then turn in the folder, or the manila folder. Not manila folder was the wrong word. It's that big brown envelope. It's like the big 8x11 envelope I'm talking about that seals at the top. They turn that back in with the expense report, and then you give them a fresh envelope. Then what you can do with that, you've got all the receipts there with the expense report. You can run it through your accounting system, stick the expense report into the envelope, and then file that whole entire envelope with all the receipts. Or you could staple the expense report to the outside of that brown folder or that brown envelope, and then file it all together. You've now filed all the receipts with the expense report. It's just a fast way to do it. And then once a year, we box up all of our receipts, all of our paperwork, label the boxes. We just buy boxes at Office Depot. We box everything up, label them, and then we start fresh folders for the next year. That, to me, is the easiest, fastest way to handle receipts. Now, ShoeboxBoxed and some of these other services are really cool, where you can scan your receipts, and that's all great and wonderful, and I have nothing negative to say about that. It's a great service. We still just do what I described with receipts. I just find it to be easier, faster, and we don't have to pay anybody to scan anything. ShoeboxBoxed is a great service, though, so that might be something. If you've never looked at it, I haven't even changed my screen since I've been talking here. This is a neat service right here, ShoeboxBoxed. So if you've not looked at that, you might consider doing it. So that's a great way to handle receipts. I got a question about training methods for new employees. So a couple ideas here. As much as possible, we try to before we even hire. So this does relate to training. Before we even hire, we try to test them out, and we've done a lot of creative things to try to test people out before we hire. So I'm not going to mention all of those, but just think through different concepts of how you might try somebody that if you're creative about it, you'll come up with a lot of different ways. How can you try somebody that doesn't work for you yet? And sometimes it costs you a little money to do it, but there's a lot of different ways that you can try out the potential employee you're going to hire, especially if they already work for another company. Or you can bring them in on the weekends and tell them and try them out part-time on a crew. Or you can take them to one of your commercial properties and have them trim or do something and do the job and just watch them do it before you even hire them. So simply filtering people out by actually seeing if they can even do the work, and just looking at how they handle themselves as they do the work will immediately help solve some of your training problems. So then I think the best way to train is just to get out in the field and train them. You just got to get out, and you got to go out there and get out of the truck and work with them, and you've got to train them on the property. So you got to show them how to do it at a property. You can't just sit in the classroom and do training. Now, I think you can do some stuff inside the office, some internal training, but most of it, I think it's best just to show up at the properties, get out of the truck, and work with them. Show them, have them do it, observe, give them constructive criticism. But training in the field, I think, is the only way to do it. Spot checking work is just so critical. Taking pictures and then circling the areas and talking to them about them, and then going out to the property to show them the property cannot be you've got to do it. I mean, a lot of people won't do it because it is costly and it takes time, and they're on the payroll when you do it. But to make them really good and make them easier to manage down the road, you've literally got to go back to the property sometimes when there are mistakes. You got to show them. Sometimes showing them a picture is not enough. You've got to put some effort into it. So I think that's the way to train it. It's really as simple as that. Eventually, if depending on your size, you can have somebody responsible for this. I personally think the best person is the person that manages the crews, and then they work with all the new guys. And a lot of times foremen can train their own new people, or you'll have lead people in each of your departments, and those people can train. But having somebody to go out there with them for a period of time is the only way to do it, in my mind. Got a question: who puts together your welcome packages? I think an easy strategy on a lot of these types of things, like welcome packages and different mailers that you do, if you don't outsource this stuff, then you can have somebody at your company do them for you. So I like part-time people for this type of stuff. So basically, in a welcome package, there's only a few things possibly that are printed specifically for that client, but there's probably other elements of your welcome package that can be pre-done. For example, it can be pre-stamped. It can have the return address put on it. It can have certain pieces, certain inserts already put into it. So basically, on any type of mailers that you do like this, you have a part-time person every week or two or three or whatever or month go through and just make, it depends on how many new clients you sell, but make 10, 20, hundreds, whatever the case may be, in advance. Then you have those at the office. They're literally pre-stamped. Everything about them's done. And then all your team has to do is just grab a welcome package, insert whatever was unique to that new client that just signed up into the welcome package, handwrite their address on the outside, and lick it and drop it in the outbound mailbox if you're a bigger business, or keep it on their desk and on the way home, drop it in the mail. So the shortcut to this is to bring in somebody part-time to do these in bulk. You don't do them one at a time. You do 100 at a time. That way they're ready for you. And I'd apply that concept to all kinds of different things that you set up. So welcome packages, I think, tend to be just fine to do internally and have people that have available time do them, or do it in between calls. Or if you're bigger, have a part-time person do this for you. Okay, so moving on to a different topic, I've got quite a few questions about cash flow and money crunches, probably because it's wintertime here. So this definitely is that time of year if your business is heavily seasonal and you're not moving into snow plowing or something of the sort, or Christmas lights, that there's a dip in income. So, and that's pretty typical in this business. So short of having saved some money or at least built up your service offering to at least cover all of your core expenses so you're not going negative, it does tend to be a time of year where revenue drops for an awful lot of companies. So, even if you factor, even if you sell your commercial and residential across 12 months and you spread it out over 12 months, that's really not doing anything for you in terms of creating a new revenue in the company. So honestly, it doesn't do anything to solve cash flow. The only reason it would solve cash flow is if basically you weren't able to save any money, or because you weren't projecting cash flow, you weren't able to budget when you had the excess money coming in the summer months, because I'm using an example here where you're not factored over a 12-month period and you're just getting paid for what you do. I mean, in those months where you're doing work, you're making a lot more money, whereas if you were factoring it across 12 months or doing installment payments, you'd make a lot less money. So all you're really doing with 12-month payments is shifting the money into other months and lowering the amount of money you get. So I like the 12-month contract. I have nothing negative to say about it, but in my opinion, it doesn't actually fix cash flow in any way. In fact, I dislike it because oftentimes you get your money slower. So I always think, just from a financial money management standpoint, you always want your money faster. You always want to get money faster and give away money slower, just from a simple financial management viewpoint. So I've never been overly excited about switching or really promoting the 12-month concept in residential. Commercial, it's a different deal, because I'd rather get my money fast, because in residential, very few homeowners start out and sign contracts for lawn service at the end of a season. They always wait to the beginning of the season. So then you immediately start out in a deficit because you're getting your money slower, and you're going to get money for work you're performing now in November, December, and January. So I actually think it's a negative to cash flow. Now, so this is why I'm saying that I don't think the 12-month thing will solve any cash flow issues. So a few more things about cash flow here. So, and again, I'm not negative on the 12 months, but everything I do or think about is in terms of speeding up cash flow. And speeding up cash flow by letting somebody pay you part of your money 7 months from now is not a good cash flow practice in my mind. Now, in commercial, it's a different deal, because you do sign a lot of commercial contracts in the winter months, and they're less sensitive to whether the grass is growing. So, and then also, that's a norm in the commercial industry. That's just sort of expected for a million different reasons, from their payable systems to their budgeting systems, to so many different factors. So none of what I just said in my mind applies to commercial, but in residential it does, because I see it as a negative to cash flow management. Unless, of course, you don't project cash flow internally, or if you just look at your bank account to see how much money you have in your bank account to be able to pay your bills. I mean, if you're just using, in a sense, those types of cash flow management practices that are fairly elementary, and most everyone is until you get bigger, then you kind of sometimes might be surprised at the end of the year, hey, where'd the money go? Because you used it to grow the company or buy new trucks and equipment, and you just, as you're running and operating, that money that you got now just seems to get consumed. And so for some companies, having their clients on 12-month installment payments is like a forced savings plan. Helps them better manage their money. So that's my take on that. Now, collections, in my mind, and most people know that we charge thousands and thousands of credit cards, because we only work, not only, but for the most part, only work with clients on the residential side that pay with a credit card each week, and that had to do with cash flow management. Yes, we give up 2-point-something% of every single transaction to be able to charge a credit card, but at the same time, it was about cash flow management, speeding it up. And the other thing it was about lowering collections costs, bad debts. So within 2 weeks or a week, when you have a client that is going to potentially not pay their bill, and you can pause the service. In Service Autopilot, there's a pause button, and that's probably where the idea came from. You can hit the pause button, and it'll pause their service until they pay that bill, and then you unpause it. And so that's a great way to help improve collections, help speed up cash flow, and it was for that reason. So this same question that I'm answering had to do with collections, or there was actually some other questions about collecting money. So by moving to the credit cards, it helps collections. But moving to credit cards in commercial is completely unrealistic. Most are not going to pay with the credit card. You're going to issue, the bigger ones there's going to be a PO involved. It's going to go through the payable system. They're going to pay you on the terms that they pay on. You can't really say, well, the way we do business is you're going to pay us in advance. If they aren't willing to do that, and they say, no, we pay on 60-day terms, and you're getting paid on 60-day terms. And the fact of the matter is, in commercial, they do pay slower, and they're stretching cash flow internally, which means they're paying you slower. It's just happening all over the board, and they're spreading it out. Payables departments are dragging their feet. And for them, it's all about internal cash flow management. For you, it screws up your cash flow. And there's almost nothing you can do about it, in my opinion. There's obviously commercial clients that you just have to make a decision based on the terms of your contract that you're going to just hold them to the contract and not get paid. Hold them to the contract and say, hey, unless you can pay on time, we're going to have to opt out of this contract because you violated the terms. That's one option. So you don't dig a deeper hole, because there truly are commercial clients that will continue to drag this out, and if you give them room, they're going to do it. My biggest recommendation on commercial, and a lot of people won't do this, and this was a company that I learned this from a business partner at a cleaning company I was partners in for years, and we did tremendous amounts of revenue, very significant amounts, and our payroll was 7 figures a month. And cash flow management, we projected cash flow. We had somebody projected cash flow every day. And where I'm going with this is, my business partner was very smart in getting our accounting department to constantly call our vendors. Like literally, if we didn't get the check, and some of our checks were approaching 7 figures, and if we didn't get because they were for a bunch of accounts, and if we didn't get that check on Mondays, we literally would have our accounting department calling them at 9 a.m. Where's the check? We're just calling to check on the check. Has it been sent? Oh, it hadn't been sent. We'll come get it. And by doing that, and the payables departments don't necessarily like this, but by doing this, those people do not want that phone call. And it guaranteed that we had our checks. You can't, when the bigger your company gets, and this is true whether you're big or small, but if you are 3 weeks behind on a $2 million check, and you're a big operation, it's huge when you're trying to meet payroll, because that means you're going to use your line of credit for possibly as much as $2 million. and that gets very significant the bigger the operation gets. And if you're small and money's very tight, it's the exact same effect. Maybe it's only $5,000, but when you're small and your bank account has a lesser amount of money in it, it hurts just as bad as a $2 million check when you're big. But as you get bigger, it gets highly risky to not have be good cash flow management. You can be extremely successful. You could have $700,000 in the bank running a big operation, and when your $1 million in money does not come in for the month, you're going to tap your 700,000. You're going to go into your line 300,000, and then if you compound that by not then having another 200,000 late, another 300,000 late, you got to go deeper into the line, and lines are only so big. And in other words, when you get big, if you do not have very large lines of credit and significant amount of money, cash flow problems can put you under very, very fast. Very fast. And so cash flow management is a practice you want to get into while you're small and really think about it. And so one of the very best ways to speed up cash flow on the commercial side is to literally call the payables department and check on the checks. Some people will hate it. They really will. And you may not like doing it. And the reason I brought up my business partner is because it's probably not something what I would have done, because it sort of goes against my personality of harassing. But he was dead on right about it. It kept our cash flow moving. They did not want the call. So if a payables check was going to go out, our check was generally going to be the one that made it out the door and didn't get extended, because they didn't want to get harassed by our company every single week. We had orchestrated in that business with some of our vendors to be paid weekly. And so because of, again, cash flow, these were companies that were huge. I mean, we're talking, some of our clients were public. Some of our clients were, these guys are approaching, they're just massive, multi-$100 million a year companies. So these are big companies that I'm referring to that we are doing work with. And so these guys have their own internal cash flow systems and payable system, and they do work the way they do it. We were even able to renegotiate our contracts and get paid weekly, even though they generally paid their vendors 30, 60, and 90 days. So that's another thing to think about. And that's why I alluded to at the beginning of this. If you don't like the way they're paying you and your contract called for 30 days, then you have the option to get out of that contract and cease the work. You've got to ask yourself if you want to do that. And if it's adversely affecting you because it's a big client and they're not paying on time, you may want to exit the agreement. But that's about all you have available to you, because the big companies know they have the power and they're going to drag out cash flow. So another example to speed up cash flow and help minimize collections is, one thing you can do sometimes, instead of when you're renegotiating commercial contracts, sometimes you can go back to the client and say, in lieu of doing a 3% price increase this year, or we'll add this additional service to your contract at no additional cost, but here's the terms that we need to negotiate on, and that is, we're going to forego the 3% price increase on the contract this year. However, we want to negotiate new terms. Everything's going to stay the same, but we need to move the terms from 30 days to weekly. We need a weekly check cut. This is completely on the table. We did this with a public company. And public companies, they generally run under SAP or big Oracle systems. They have audit quarterly or monthly, whatever the deal may be. They have audited financials. But my point of bringing up SAP is it's a very structured system. And there's a lot of flexibility, but it's very structured. And sometimes these big companies, they don't want to go against their norms, and there's certain practices they have to follow. And so my point is, even with public companies, we were able to do things like I'm mentioning. In fact, with one of the companies, we negotiated weekly terms paid 1 week in advance, and each check was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so consider that. It's on the table. It's a way to speed up cash flow, and we negotiated in lieu of a price increase, and it did affect our margins a bit. It brought net profit down a bit, but we forego a point on net profit to be able to speed up cash flow and get paid a week in advance, because when you're dealing with checks that are 100,000s each, you don't want to go 3 weeks and not get paid before you realize you have a problem. So getting paid 1 week in advance and getting paid weekly quickly calls out a problem, and you can start scaling back your variable expense if you've got an issue. So that's on the table. Also, by all means, collections. You've got to make collections calls. It was one of my biggest mistakes when I started our lawn care company is I was so busy running around, I didn't make collections calls and I let it fester. And you train your clients to know that they're not going to get calls, and you train them to know that they can pay their bills late. And so I would internally have someone on your team review your open invoices reports and your AR reports every week and go down the list and make the calls. So just like I mentioned in commercial, you're making the calls. Is the check ready? Can we get it? Have you mailed it? Just like doing that, then you can do the exact same thing with the residential clients. If they haven't paid, call and check on it. If they haven't paid a week later, call and check on it. You said that you were going to mail it. If you use Service Autopilot, set up document templates in Service Autopilot that are pre-written. All your team has to do is click email and blast those out. And then if they don't respond to the email after 1 or 2 emails, for example, we have 3 escalating emails, and they start out friendly, and the third one gets a little more firm and says, hey, still haven't got that check. And then if you after 3 emails that are, and these are, by the way, are pre-written, you don't have to write these every time. They just click it and print it. They just click on it and click email, and it blasts it out in Service Autopilot and personalizes it. That's a great system. If you don't use Service Autopilot, you can save it in Outlook or Gmail, your pre-written emails, then substitute out their name, and you can do the whole thing manually, but you can mimic that process. And after 2 or 3 emails they haven't responded, pick up the phone. And if you call them and you have a habit of always in calling and checking, you'll train your clients that you've got the bill that they don't want to be late on. I'm not a big fan of late fees. I'm not opposed to them, but I'm not a big fan of it just for a number of reasons. But if you're not going to do late fees, you've got to have an internal process. If you're not going to have an internal process, you've got to assess late fees. You've got to put some pain in the process. The bills I don't forget to pay are my credit card bills and my electricity bill, because they'll turn it off or I'll have to pay a bunch of interest, and I don't like paying interest. So I don't screw up on those bills very often, and it's because there's pain associated with it. So you've got to create some pain for your clients if they don't pay and don't pay fast, and that's going to be, they're going to get a call, they're going to get an email. Email's not enough pain personally, but they've got to get phone calls. So that's a big way to increase cash flow. Or not increase cash flow, to lower collections, is you've got to have an internal process. And then from there, if you're not getting paid and they just won't pay and you've got an internal process with emails and phone calls, the only other option is to go to collections. There's a lot of collections companies you can work with, and I would suggest it. And that's really it outside that I know of. There's probably other ways, but those are the big ones. I think it all starts with training your clients that you've got to pay or we're going to call you, and putting together very consistent billing practices. If you mail your invoices on the 1st, the next month on the 20th, the next month on the 16th, and the next month on the 28th, your clients can't depend on your invoicing, and so you can barely expect them to have any accountability to pay your invoices on any certain frequency, because it doesn't fit into how they even pay their bills. So encouraging a client to pay you on time also goes back to having good billing practices that are very consistent and very accurate. And then once you have that, you can actually then make the collections calls. You've got to have somebody do that. And if you have to, then outsource it. But I massively screwed that up in the beginning of the lawn care company, and it cost us a lot of money that could have been saved had we been better about that. We were just so busy we weren't doing it. And I think it's actually one of the ultimate sins in the business. Not marketing and not collecting your money are 2 of your biggest mistakes. And so if you're going to drop the ball on something else, that would be wise. Don't drop the ball on those 2 things. I got a question on lines of credit, because I've mentioned lines of credit before. So there's a bunch of ways to do lines of credit. Lines of credit are absolutely going to hit your personal credit score, and you're going to have to submit P&Ls and a balance sheet, and you're going to have to basically prove different things about your business so that you can qualify for the line of credit. Getting lines of credit now are so much more difficult than they were 4 years ago. So a line of credit is a great way to go. I do recommend you have it if you are good about managing your money and it's not going to be tempting to you like a line of credit would, or like a credit card would be. Then I recommend a line of credit as a safety net. Even if you don't use it, just get it and have it sitting there. Because the last thing you want to do, and especially as you get bigger, is to have some unforeseen catastrophe or some massive 9/11 type event that everything just stops for a week. And you are just screwed, basically, because you don't have the money in your bank account. Being able to hit that line of credit could really save a company. There are companies that have gone under, that things have spiraled out of control because some bills didn't get paid, and it just spirals out of control. Having the line of credit to give you some protection is really important. So I highly suggest you have a line of credit that's just sitting there for you, and it's there in case you need it. So only going to say a couple things about line of credit. Shop them all around. Be prepared to give financials. If you're with a bank now, a lot of times if you're running some decent revenue through their account, you've got some history with them. A lot of times you can get a $25,000 line of credit or some number without any real approval other than maybe a credit score. But my experience has been when you start to cross the $50,000 threshold, you're starting to look at P&Ls and balance sheets, and you got to submit some stuff. They're going to start checking you out. When you start getting into the hundreds of thousands to $500,000 to $1 million on the line of credit, from my experience, it gets infinitely more difficult. And you want to start interviewing different banks. You need to not only think about who will approve you, you actually want to interview. There are real risks with lines of credit that one day the bank will decide that the way they do business is changing and that certain portfolio clients are no longer valuable to their business, and therefore they don't care to continue issuing lines of credit to those clients, and they'll call your line. Calling your line can be an absolute disaster if you have money that is basically in use under the line. So you got a line for $500,000, you're 300 into your line, the bank calls the line, gives you 30 days to secure funds and pay off the line. That is a terrible situation to be in. And that happened to a lot of companies in 2008 when things started falling apart. And you want to make sure you're not in that position. And I've actually been through that exact scenario where our line didn't get called, but we knew it was coming because of the financial crisis in a sense. This was not with the lawn care company. This was a different company. We knew the line was going to get called, and we were shopping it. And generally, when a massive number of banks decide they no longer want to be in the business of, and it's usually by industry, they don't want to be in certain industries anymore, and they want to call in their lines. Running around looking for other banks that want to take those industries tends to be hard. There's a reason a bank is exiting certain industries. And so other banks, you can assume, are doing the very same thing. So in the moment when you desperately need to pull your money from one line, find a new line to secure, to shore up funds, you're going to find it a little bit challenging. So my point is, there's value in not only looking and investigating and interviewing who will issue a line, but getting a feel for what type of client that bank likes to work with. So who is a good portfolio client for that bank? What types of industries in? What are the SIC codes, SIC codes of the industries that they're serving? Who do they like? Are they more attracted to retail? Are they more attracted to fulfillment type companies that manufacture and ship product? Are they more attracted to service companies? Do they have a niche? Who do they like? Who do they understand? If you're a service company and they tend to work with companies that are in the business of fulfillment and product creation and manufacturing, and they're funding lines on manufacturing and such, well, that's what they understand. They may not understand the service industry quite so well. So in downturns, they're going to shy away from service industries. Your line's going to be more likely to be called. So there's a lot of factors you want to look into if you're going to secure a line of credit of any size. You want to make sure that that bank fits your industry. They understand you, and you want to know the terms on how long you have if they call the line. Now, if you violate the covenants, there's going to be a set of covenants that you have to honor on a line. There are basically rules you have to abide by, paperwork you have to submit, financial numbers you can't fall under, and you've got to provide these covenants. The bigger your line gets, the more often you've got to provide them. Sometimes it's annually, but as your line grows, it'll be monthly. And you'll have to issue proof monthly that you're meeting covenants and a very large line. And so again, I'm not going to go into all the details, but these are some things to think about. So my biggest point here is when you're interviewing, you're not just looking for somebody to accept you, you're looking for somebody that fits you. That's just absolutely critical, because in 2 years from now, if your line gets called, you don't want to go out of business. Now, if you have credit score problems, or you're in a risky business, or you have very few assets. So in a lot of service industry businesses, they have very, very few assets. And so most of their expense is labor. They don't have a lot of trucks and equipment. Just depends on what side of the lawn care industry you're in. So, depending on what you're doing, you may not have a lot of assets. Well, assets determine the liquidity of your business at some level. So, if you don't have much of an asset value and it's all just based on revenue being generated, then if they call your line and you forfeit or you go under or you can't make the payment, if they can't liquidate your assets to recover the line, then you're a higher risk to them. So if you have low assets, you're a higher risk. Or if you have personal credit problems or a bad credit score, or you don't have a big enough P&L, then you could, and actually what I just said, take that back on the big enough P&L, because what I'm about to say, you need to have it. Let me explain. Where I'm going with this is if you can't qualify for what's called a true line of credit, you can look into what's called factoring. So take a look at factoring if you really need a line and you can't get it. Factoring is a little more costly. It's an alternative source of financing. It mimics a line of credit, but factoring is based on your receivables. So for example, I'm going to use big numbers here because companies that usually use big lines have big numbers. Let's say your company's generating $500,000 a month, and so you want to secure a line of credit for, let's just say $500,000. And so you tend to run a accounts receivable, your AR account in your accounting books tends to be about, let's just say, roughly about $600,000 a month. So on average, if you look at the fluctuation of your AR account, it tends to bounce somewhere in the $500,000 to $700,000 range. So that's your receivables, and you can imagine all these numbers on a smaller scale as well. So what will happen there is you're doing about $500,000 in revenue. Your receivables at any moment runs about $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. What a factoring company will do is they'll come in and they'll say, tell you what, we'll lend up to 80% of your receivables. And so if you're running, for easy math, you're running about $500,000 a month in receivables, then they'll lend up to $400,000. Basically, they're guaranteeing your line against your receivables. The concept being that if you forfeit, if you go under, you should have about $500,000 in receivables sitting out there. They lended up to 80%, which was $400,000. They can come in and take all your receivables. So they can come in and take that $400,000 or $500,000, and you can guarantee it'll be over $400,000 if you're 100% into your line, because there'll be penalties and fees. They're going to come in and they'll take all your receivables. Some companies that do factoring actually force you to send all of your receivables through a different post office account that they actually deposit the money. So they start intercepting all of your receivables. That way they have control that if you go under, all the money still comes to them. And so I'm not going to go into all the details, but look into factoring if that's something you need. It's a way to get alternative financing. It is huge. This is a big concept. And there's lots and lots of guys doing it, lots and lots of companies doing it. If at all possible, stay away from it. But if you have no other choices and you're trying to grow, then factoring is totally on the table. But no, you're dealing with bankers, and if they shut you down, they can put you out of business. So you've got to be very careful with this, and you don't want to do any of this unless you have very good cash flow management, unless you're doing cash flow projections frequently, and this stuff becomes really important as you get big. So you have to really understand your numbers. You can't make it to December and think, oh, wow, we don't have any money left in the bank. You needed to know about how much money you're going to have in the bank in December, in March. So don't enter into these big lines of credits unless you really start to know the financials of your business. All right. Okay, so I'm going to move on. I got a question about prepayments. So let me just talk about something really fast in prepayments, and I'm not a big fan of prepayments. I know the industry is a big fan of prepayments. Let me just give you my alternative view on it. I'm not bashing prepayments in any way, because there is a lot of wisdom behind getting prepayments, but let me just give you a couple examples that I see over and over and over again. And so again, we're talking about cash flow and money management and lines of credits, and so I think this kind of fits in nicely. So let's talk about this concept here real quick. All right, so let's say that I tell my client that we can do a prepayment, so they can pay me $1,000 up front, and I will and I will give them a 7% discount on their money for prepaying me $1,000 up front at the beginning of the year. Okay? So they're getting a 7% discount. Now, if you are in a scenario, maybe it's 5% discount, whatever the case may be, but basically you're going to discount service because they're going to give you an upfront check for a certain amount of money. So let me just throw a couple ideas at you. Now, this is a very nice practice if you have cash flow problems. This is a great way in the worst part of the year to bring in a nice amount of cash. So it's a smart practice. It's a very creative practice. It's smart. So I'm not negative on it. However, I just want to mention some alternatives here, and this is the way I think about it. So if you're in a bind for money, if you don't have any personal money, you're not doing any personal investing, you're just kind of scraping by building the company and things are tight, you don't have a line of credit, this may be your only source of early funding in the business and to covering those low performing months where cash flows down and you're building back up your account to get you through the year. So if your only option is this, then it's a very interesting concept and wise. However, if you're copying the industry because everybody does prepayments, I would highly suggest you rethink it. Just my opinion. So think about this. Let me tell you why. So if you have any money at all, if you ever make buying decisions based on or purchasing decisions based on interest, the amount of interest you're going to pay, the amount of interest you're going to receive, like for example, I pay cash for everything. However, if I can finance a car at 2.1% interest, there's no way in the world I'm going to pay cash for that car. I'm going to finance it. So, if you think like that, then consider this here. So let's say that for the sake of easy math, let's actually change this to $700. Let's say you do. I'll use a fertilization and weed control example. So you've got 7 applications you'll do over the course of 12 months. Oops, I screwed up here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, there's 7, perfectly. Okay, so you got 7 applications. So in December of 2011, you receive a $700 check. You're then going to essentially, and actually let's say you take 7% off of that, so that would actually be, my math's not going to be quite right, but your check would actually be something like this, $651. Okay? So you normally would have received $100 for each application. So you would have normally received $700. Now you're just getting $651. Okay? So when you look at one example here, you're going to look at this and you're going to say, we're talking about dollars. When you're a $100,000, $500,000 company, it starts to compound. When you're $1 million, $5 million, it starts to get bigger. So it's all about managing small numbers when you're small because they turn into big numbers. So let me just throw out this alternative concept. All right, so here's what happens. You got your money in December. In January, or let's just say February, you do an app, and then in April, June, I'm going to run out here, August, October, I screwed this up. Let me go back here, July, August, so bad example, but you'll get the gist. November. Okay, so you got 7 apps. Okay, you gave them a 7% discount. You gave them, I don't know what the math is here. I should have done it before I answered this question. This is probably completely wrong. My theory is, and I mean, my answer is not wrong. My answer is right. My point is my math is going to be completely flawed here. So do not get hung up on the actual numbers. They're completely incorrect. I just want to communicate a point. If you give somebody a 7% discount on February service, so 7% is the APR, the annual percentage rate. It's not 7% in February. It's 7% I don't know how to put this exactly. In February, you gave them a 7% discount on work for letting you have your money early for about 45 days. I have no idea what that is, but that could be like the equivalent of 21% interest because you did a full 7% discount. In April, it's a lesser number. So I'm just communicating a concept. I know this is wrong. My point is that if you're giving a full discount on February service of a full 7%, not say 1%, And because you're only performing the work 45 days later, you're giving them essentially a huge discount on this work. It's not really 7%. If you give them a full 7% off the work next November, yes, that's closer to an actual 7% APR because you actually held their money for a full 12 months. Here, you gave them a 7% discount and you held their money for a month or two. Worse yet, what I see a lot of companies doing, they're collecting this 651 check and they're not applying it to fertilization weed control. 3 months later, they do a color change or a flower install for $500 and they apply the prepayment to the $500 flower change, and then they bill out these changes. They just gave them a 7% discount on holding their money for 2 months on a color change. That's a disastrous. That's like credit card fee type of money you're paying to get money early. So hopefully this concept makes sense. If you're not in a position where you have to get your speed up your cash flow and get your money earlier, you don't want to do this because you might as well be floating your money on credit cards versus going through all the paperwork and mailing and stamps and management and counting and tracking of all the prepayments. You might as well just stick the money on a credit card and pay it off in a couple months versus give these kinds of outrageous APRs to your client. So I don't know if I've communicated that properly, but again, if you fully discount application number 1 down to, let's say, $93 a month after you receive the money, that is a 7% discount on money for 1 month. So imagine it from this standpoint. Let's say I came to you and I said, tell you what, give me 10 grand. I'm going to pay you $7,000. I'm going to pay you $700 in interest every month. This scenario, when you're performing the work a month or two later, is like that. You're paying the full 7% only a month or two later. You're not paying the factor of that 0.00 something a month or two later. So you fully discount this down to $93. If you went and got a car loan and if you went and got a car loan on that first $500 you financed that you paid back, you paid very, very little interest on that first $500. It was minuscule. What you paid all your interest on was the payment, was the money 60 days or 6 months out. So anyway, I just wanted to throw this concept out there because I got a question about the prepayments. And so if you're doing prepayments and you don't have cash flow issues or you have a line of credit, I personally don't see the point in doing prepayments. Use the line of credit. Money's ridiculously cheap right now. It's just ridiculously cheap. And a lot of times let's say you use a 7% line of credit, you're going to pay your line of credit back possibly within months. And it's not 7%. If you borrow $100,000 for 2 months, you don't pay $7,000 in interest. You just pay, a small amount of money in interest because it was 7% across the whole year. Whereas these prepayments, these are 7% applied to the first month to a visit 1 month later, 2 months later, 4 months later. So you're really paying out huge APRs, huge percentages. So in lieu of prepayments, I would do lines of credit if you have that possibility, if you can afford to do that. All right, I'm going to move on to another topic, but a lot of this call seems to be sort of financial, and so kind of staying along those lines. So there's a question I've got regarding basically talking about buying versus leasing and office space and some different things of that sort. So I'm going to talk about these topics from a financial standpoint. So I'd be interested in any feedback. If you have any, you could comment below this. When I post this video, if you would comment, ideally on Lawn Care Millionaire instead of YouTube. And that way I can read your comments and respond back to them. But so I'm interested if there's any alternative ideas. But just here's kind of my take on some of this stuff. And just to tell you a little background here, I tend to be of the personality type, or I tend to gravitate towards trying to avoid debt as much as possible. I do believe, on a side note, that if you will run up quite a bit of debt, get investors, use big lines of credits, things of that, I think it's hard to refute that it does. Those types of practices will help bring in cash flow and money so that you can grow faster and hire people faster. So I do think that taking this approach of a more conservative approach to debt is in a sense a little negative in regards to the speed that you'll grow your company at. But I also take two other things into account. I'm telling you all this just to give me so that as I give you my opinions on a few things here, you know the background in case you disagree with my overall philosophy. But I also at the same time I kind of look at this stuff as like I'll give you another example. If I was building up my lawn company or a different company to sell it, I would probably be more inclined to use debt or investment capital to very rapidly grow it and hire a bunch of employees very, very quickly that have a tremendous amount of knowledge to speed up the growth. Whereas I kind of look at everything as I'm doing this I'm building stuff over a 10 or 20 year time period and I'm keeping it and it's going to be a stream of income for me. And so I feel like in the first many years you're laying the foundation of your company and so I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up with guys that are, you hear about the guy that took his business from 0 to 10 million in 3 years. Generally, those guys have all done it several times before. They don't generally do that on their first business. And so, and a lot of times when they're doing it again, they're doing it in the same industry they already did it once. So they, like for example, if I was doing a second lawn care business, I could shortcut it drastically because I've learned so much. Same with janitorial or any other thing I've done. Um, a lot of times I don't think you could compare yourself to that. I think getting caught up in it and therefore going into a lot of debt to keep up or feel like you're underperforming because you aren't growing as fast as somebody else. A lot of my opinion is I'd rather grow a little bit slower, build a really good team, a really good base, be fairly well organized, understand my target market, understand my marketing, because I feel like it's like pouring the concrete on your house. If you screw it up, and in 5 years from now, yes, you've got this big operation, but you hate the people you work with, you hate the culture, the people aren't that well, you feel like you're doing all the heavy lifting, they're not that well trained, and you're already deep in debt that you've got to climb out of, which means you basically got to put your business on hold in a sense in terms of growth to kind of clean up. That doesn't seem to be a very fun kind of business to run. And so my mindset is going into this, I'm building something for the long term, and I want to like the business. I want to like my partners. I want to like my team. I want to like everybody I work with. If we don't like them, there's no point having them on the team. So I really feel strongly that every single person I work with in Service Autopilot and the lawn care company, I like every single one of them. They are a core part of our team, and we would not want to lose them. I truly feel that way about every single person we have. And I think if I felt any different, then I wouldn't like what I'm doing, and then I'd get bored and I just want to sell it. So I think growing slowly or slower, better said, um, is one way to build a better company. And now it picks up speed as you get going because you start to have resources, and because maybe you did have a somewhat of a debt-free strategy, you're now starting to build up big amounts of cash, and you're starting to, whereas somebody else is paying on the 20, 25, 30 trucks they have and paying on all their equipment every month and all the other things they're paying on, and in my case, I have no payments on anything. That at some point starts to become a big competitive advantage. And then the other thing about it, and again, I'm only saying all this just to give you my mindset as I answer these questions. I just personally think I'm building it for the long term, so build it right. It'll be a little bit slower, but in the long term, it'll pay off. Kind of like the attitude of investing or saving. While your friends are out driving Ferraris and living in $1 million house, you're putting money in the bank and you're growing your money. And one day, 20 years from now, they will have nothing but Ferrari payments and big house payments, and you'll own everything outright. That's where real money is made and value is made. So that's kind of my mindset on all this stuff. So you sacrifice a bit up front, and you might not impress everybody around you quite as much because you grow a little bit slower. But at the end of the day, I say, who cares? This is a long-term thing, not a short-term, and who really cares about impressing anybody anyway? Because anyway, I'm getting off topic. My point is, there's negatives to this mindset, not in terms of building the team, but in terms of taking on debt. And that is, there's two big risks here. One is if you pay cash for all your trucks versus lease or rent, and the same is true for your equipment, and you do it to the detriment of lowering your bank accounts, you could put yourself into a serious cash flow issue. So I want to be a little bit careful because I have said a lot about debt over time, because I am pretty big on this, but I'm not, I've been asked to, like, if I follow Dave Ramsey. And I actually don't necessarily follow Dave Ramsey. I actually think he's interesting, though. I think he's a little hardcore for me. I wouldn't sell my car and walk. I'd rather have a $3,000 car, a car payment, and and I wouldn't buy a $2,000 car that I'm going to do an alternator, an air conditioner, a transmission, and all these things on in the next year. I'd finance a $10,000 car and just be diligent in my life about paying that thing off as quick as I can. But I think he has to take those positions because if he gives people wiggle room, they're going to take the wiggle room. That's my theory on him. So I like Dave Ramsey. That's not really where my ideas come from. I buy into what he's saying, but I'm a more of a in-between kind of guy, and I think that debt has its place and it's wise at times. Like I'll give you an example. I just bought a brand new car for my wife, and we were going to pay cash for it. And when I was about to write the check, the guy said, "Would you like to finance the car?" And I said, "No, I'm paying cash for it." And he said, "Well, I could give you 4.5% interest." And I said, "Yeah, that's interesting, but I'm not interested." And I said, "Is that your best rate?" And he literally within 2 seconds said, "No, I could do 2.1." And so I financed the car. That's crazy to go pay a lot of money, pay a lot of money for this car and pay, deplete my bank account when I could buy money at 2%. That's just ridiculously cheap. I'd buy it all day long at 2%. So my point is that there are times when I think having some debt's wise. Now, if I go out and buy 10 cars and I go buy a $2 million house and suddenly I have tons of payments at 2%, well, that's not smart money. So, I think if there's some wisdom in debt used properly, and there's wisdom in leasing and all that. So I'm not opposed. I've actually leased and I've used debt. I've used line of credit. I've used it all, but I use it very prudently and carefully. And I've used lines of credit when we have like ridiculous amounts of money in the bank. I mean, huge amounts of money. And we still use lines of credit because there are certain times when it makes sense. And so in all of this, what you have to consider is, are you putting yourself into any type of a financial position where you might not be able to cover yourself if something bad happens? And, to be like, just think worst case. If you've ever read anything about what happened after 9/11, there are huge companies that just disappeared. Some were affected directly by 9/11. Others were affected by money. I think Peter Lowe events, one of the big events out there where they put on big seminars and stuff. Those guys got killed by 9/11 because suddenly they couldn't book these huge conferences and they had ridiculous amounts of money invested. And if you get in a situation where for whatever reason some big event happens and it slows down your revenue, or everybody says we don't need you for the next month, or whatever happens, you could be toast if you don't have a reserve. So if you went and spent all of your money to be debt free, it could end you. There's a million unique variables that can happen. So there's real wisdom in having not only backup lines of credit, even if you never intend to use them, but also having funds in your bank account, both personal and business wise. And so by spending all your money, you put yourself in a very risky situation. So I think and also keep in mind, outside of leasing, anything you buy, you can always finance it for a few months and then pay it off. And so I would just be very careful with paying everything off. Also, sometimes, and again, I feel like I'm being a little long-winded here, but let me throw something else out at you. So I'll get this question sometimes by guys that are only, and this doesn't matter if you're small or large, this answer. So I'll get you'll get questions by guys that are like, hey, I do like $100,000 a year in business. So they got a business doing like $100,000 a year, and let's just say they're out there working the business, and I'll just for easy math, they're making $25,000 a year, and they're wondering, what am I doing wrong in my business? Why I only make $25,000 a year? The reason you only make $25,000 a year is because you only gross $100,000 a year. That's hardly anything. I'm not I'm not knocking $100,000 a year. I'm just saying you're only grossing $100,000. You can only take so much out of it. You can't extract six figures from $100,000 because you still got all your expenses and stuff. So a lot of times the only way to increase your income, the only way to solve some of your financial problems is sometimes to grow your way out of them. So if you want to make six figures, you ain't going to do it with a $200,000 business, but you could do it maybe with a $500,000 business or $1 million business. So you've got to grow your way out of these problems. You got to grow your, another thing is when you're small, you've got problems with redundancy. You've got one core guy you depend on. He doesn't come to work, you're screwed. Well, the only way to solve that problem is to grow yourself out of that problem. There's a million business problems that can only be solved by growth. And there's a million business problems that come with growth. So it's a catch-22, but at the same time, you're just selling business. All we're doing in this business is selling time. And if you make $10 for every hour you sell that you can put in your pocket, it's pretty easy to understand that the only way to make another $10 is to sell another hour. That's it. There is no magic thing. You can't suddenly squeeze another 50% of profits or 100% of profits or another $10, $20, $30 out of the same hourly bill. There's just a flat out a limitation there that you're going to bump up against. So there's only so much money that can be squeezed out of every hour you sell, and so the only way to increase your income is to sell more hours. Well, sometimes when you pay cash for every single thing and you grow really, really slow, you can't sell yourself out of a problem you've got. You can't build redundancy. You can't increase your paycheck. You can't do some of the things you know you need to do to further improve and better your business or protect your business from other things. And so there is wisdom at times to very cautiously using debt. And so I had to say all that to say that my opinion on buying trucks is buy them outright and pay for them, and buy used low mileage. That's my opinion. Now, in a company I used to own, we leased. We didn't have many trucks. We actually didn't have a lot of assets, but we ran 4 big Isuzu NPR trucks with $60,000 worth of equipment in each truck, and we leased all of that. We leased the equipment, the truck, everything, and we just got it down to one payment. It was like, I don't remember, 1,000 something a month per truck. And that made a lot of financial sense in our case, and for tax reasons, it worked out nicely. Everything about it worked out nicely. Now, those $4,000 or $5,000 in payments, those weren't even 0.00001% of our income in a month. In a month, it was nothing. It was just a teeny piece of what we made per month, and so it was a non-event. But at the same time, it kept $400,000 in cash we would have had to written out of the business. It kept it in the bank account. So there was wisdom in doing that for not only that reason, but tax reasons and several other things. And so my point is, you've got to really look at every single thing you do this way. I would probably be more inclined if you were kind of balancing what do you pay versus what do you finance. I think I would finance my trucks and my big equipment first, and I'd pay cash for all my small stuff. It would just make simply doing your accounting so much easier because you're rolling your assets. When you get into small equipment, that stuff's rolling every year, every 3 years. It's just kind of rolling through that equipment. So I wouldn't finance that stuff. So I'd personally try to pay cash for all equipment. I'm not talking Bobcats and stuff like that. And then I would finance trucks. So if you're balancing this out. And so I'd finance more of like my fixed asset type of stuff. Now, take in mind that a good CFO, part-time CFO kind of person, a really strong accountant type individual is going to have different advice. You need to get it from them, but this is just my take on it. So be careful being too hardcore on the debt strategy. And so that's one item. So I had a question about phone systems. I'm a big fan of voice over IP. So if you can get a fast enough internet connection at your office, so data phone is going to consume your bandwidth pretty significantly, a lot more than, say, just browsing the web. And so if you've got good bandwidth at your office, I'm a big fan of 8x8, Ring Central, some of these voice over IP companies. There's a lot of them out there. I lean towards Ring Central. I like Ring Central. And if you happen to be one of our Service Autopilot clients and you're thinking about this, go Ring Central because we're going to integrate with them. So it'll be a little bit, but that's where we're going. So Ring Central, big fan of them for voice over IP. I can't recommend it enough for a million reasons. So I won't talk about much, but you can. It's just like it's what you used to have to pay $20,000 to have a Nortel phone system hanging in your closet at the office. You can do it all now through voice over IP using a service like Ring Central. Full intercom, music on hold, phone queues. I love one of the features on Ring Central where if you got an iPhone, you can do call spoofing. So your guys could be in their trucks and they can call your client. It'll show on their caller ID your office phone number, not their cell phone number. That way, if they call back through the office. You don't start getting clients calling your team's phones and leaving voicemails on cell phones all throughout your company, and then you have no accountability to know if they're ever getting returned. So big fan of that. I personally use one phone number, so that was a question. I use one phone number, main phone number. However, I am a big fan of tracking phone numbers. So you can put a different phone number on the side of a truck or a different phone number on a postcard, so you can buy tracking numbers. And there's services that you can do this. So if this is something you're interested in, you'll want to do a little research on this. But you can buy these tracking phone numbers, and basically it'll count. RingCentral offers this feature as well, and it'll track every time somebody calls that number, so you can keep up with if that basically if that marketing's working in a somewhat automated fashion. So you could buy a tracking phone number, put it on a postcard, mail the postcard, and then count that 75 people called off of that postcard. And you could do so without actually even having to answer the phone. Not that you wouldn't answer the phone, but my point is, even if nobody picks up the phone, you can still track that somebody called and then track it back to that postcard because you used a phone number for tracking. So there's real value in doing that. Another question had to do with office shop leasing space. So I'm actually going through this right now. I've leased space a number about I've been involved in leasing space about 5 times in the last 8 years, and we're moving Service Autopilot right now to bigger offices, and so we're going through the leasing of space right now. So um, this individual just wanted some ideas and thoughts on this. This varies all throughout the country. I'll tell you, for lawn care businesses, I'm a big fan of public storage type units. There's some popping up around the country now where they have offices that you can lease. So they have offices built in front of the storage units. And if I was building a yard, if I bought the property and built, which I haven't been able, we could talk about it, but I've found it hard to justify based on what I can lease at. But if I was building, I would build something similar to the public storage unit concept. The entire exterior of my property would essentially be a wall of public storage units surrounding the perimeter of the property with the yard in the center. And so I love that concept. There's also some really interesting things you can do now if you have a yard, buying old containers off of tractor trailer. So these trucking companies would buy these big trailers. They're expensive. I used to be in that industry. Those things are expensive, and then when they finally retire those, you can buy those, and it's amazingly cheap. You can buy those containers. Those containers are nearly impossible to move, and you can put those out on your property, and you can store stuff inside of them like mulch. There's a lot you can do with the containers. So that's a really inexpensive route if you've got your own property. So where I'm going with this is that I love the public storage concept for most lawn care type companies, most storage companies. Just depends on your scenario. It's just so incredibly affordable. We look at our square footage cost, like our office cost is about $15 per square foot is what our office cost runs, and that's to basically to have office space. But we can get our space for equipment, things like that, down to $6, $7, $8. And so far, and that's using public storage units. Sometimes you can go cheaper than that. So it's a really creative approach to offices. So I'm a big fan of that. But if you build out and lease offices, here's a couple pointers. When you're shopping your leases on your office space in the commercial market, it's going to vary around the country, but a lot of times there's all-inclusive and then there's non-inclusive, and I don't know what the actual word for that is. And basically, it is usually you can pay an increased amount of money to have things like the AC unit covered, have any problems that go wrong covered, possibly have janitorial covered, and so you pay an extra rate. So, for example, if I say $15 per hour, $15 per square foot, that's $15 times the square footage. So if you lease 10,000 square feet, it's $15 times 10,000 square feet. That's what you pay annually, and then divide that out by 12. Now, a lot of these properties have what's called triple net, where you go into the lease and then you're responsible for taxes and insurance and all that. And then some, it's all included, where you just pay a certain amount. So, for example, maybe on a $15 property in my market, $15 per square foot property, I could go all inclusive maybe for $21 a square foot. So 21 times whatever the square foot of the property is times 12, or $21 times the square foot of property would be what you would pay annually to rent that property. So where I'm going with this is, if it's not all inclusive, one of the things you have to watch in your leases, and one of the questions you have to ask, is a lot of the commercial properties
They're going to have multiple roof units for AC depending on how big your property is. A lot of this stuff's not included. So when you go in and you rent these properties, a lot of them will put some dollar figure allowance towards taxes, towards um, grounds maintenance, things of that sort. So, like, I'll give you an example. Maybe they allocate $3 of your lease towards all these expenses, and then and they peg it at $3. So from year to year, let's say next year their total expenses equate to $3.10. Then at the end of the year, they're going to take 10 cents times your square footage and issue a bill for the overage because there's an allowance built into your contract. So that's something that a lot of properties do in the commercial market, and you've got to watch that when you're negotiating your leases. It's pretty standard, so I'm not saying you can get out of it. The alternative to get out of it is to go to an all-inclusive lease that costs more money. The other thing about it is a lot of these leases, they're going to include things like they cover the concrete, they'll probably cover maybe the pipes underground. They're going to cover roofing the building and the facade outside. But if the AC unit goes out, if it needs to be replaced, if there's electrical issues, if the windows break, that's all on you. So you've got to be really careful negotiating your leases and look at the life on these AC units. And by the contract, the previous tenant has to fix the unit or replace the unit if it goes out under their lease term. And so they don't always put in 20-year units. A lot of times probably 10-year units. They go a little bit cheaper. So when you're going in these leases, you have to look at how long's the unit been in there because that's one of your big expenses. And so just these are the kind of things to be really, really watch if you're leasing big space and it's not all inclusive. You're going to be liable or responsible during the term of the lease for anything that goes wrong with anything in the building. So you want to be certain you get some audit reports on this stuff to make certain that that unit's good. That you're not entering a lease on a unit that's 8 years old that'll probably go out in the next 2 years while you're in the middle of your lease, and you're going to be on the hook for 8-10 grand. So if you're leasing commercial property, these are really important questions to find out exactly what you're responsible for, to get inspections on different aspects of that building to make sure that you're not going to get stuck with some giant bill. And again, there is that all-inclusive route. So that would cover all that. But my experience is you're going to pay a good $5-6 extra per square foot for all that stuff to be included. So if you're entering a lease and they happen to have new AC units and they're in great condition, then a lot of times it is less expensive to enter one of these leases where it's not all inclusive. The other thing is when you're negotiating your lease, a lot of times there is behind. So, like, let's say they quote you $14 per square foot. You're going to be setting up for a 3 to 5 year lease term on the property, which again is another reason why I like public storages so much for service companies or smaller properties of that sort, because you don't have to enter these long lease terms. Whereas if you go lease 10,000 square feet, it's a long lease. So I think there's some real value in going into shorter lease terms to give yourself more flexibility in case some of the conditions of your business change. So again, if you're going to enter a lease, and let's say they've quoted $16 a square foot, generally there's some number built in there of allowances that you can make wall changes. You can, take down walls, put up walls, change the doors, recarpet, paint. There's some allowance they've got it built in there that they're willing to spend. You don't necessarily know what that is before you move into the property. So right before you move in, all of that is negotiable. There's an allowance generally built in, and then once you exceed that allowance, then they'll factor in a lot of times some of those improvements into your lease and amortize it across the lease term. So 36 months or 60 months or whatever the term of your lease is. So those are points that all should be negotiated up front on the lease. So this is getting into bigger leases than I'm talking about now. But if you're keeping things simple, and just like I was talking about, debt and such, and just keeping things simple, the easiest way to keep it simple is to not buy your property. Now, a lot of guys have made more money over the years by buying their property and buildings and paying those off than they actually made out of their businesses, because after 20 years of running their company, they've got a property that's appreciated in value, as well as they've paid it off with the funds in the company. So I'm not opposed to, in any way, to buying and owning your own property, but in my mindset, and while you're a younger company, never knowing the direction you're going to go, you could be 5-10 years old and still not know where you're going to end up. I highly recommend that you consider just leasing to give yourself increased flexibility. So anyway, that's a few words about leasing. All right, so I've actually got quite a few questions left, but I'm just going to handle one more for tonight, and I'll handle the rest next month. This question is, how much information should you reveal to employees about the financials, pricing, and customer list of your business? Um, so my take on this is, fortunately, in the late 90s, in the 90s, I was an employee. That's the only job I really ever had. Everything else I've ever done, even back in high school, I did it. I was self-employed, did my own stuff. And so in the 90s, I did work for a company for 4 years, a software company, and I'm actually glad I did, because it was an interesting experience. I learned a lot, and at the same time, I got to be on the other side of the fence for 4 years. And so here's where I'm going with this. To answer this question is, I remember when I got hired, and it wasn't a big company. I don't remember how many employees there were exactly, but under 20. And it wasn't a big company, but I wasn't on the inside. Like, for example, the owner and a couple of the guys that were running the company, they'd have, and there was no reason I should have been involved in any of their meetings, but they'd have these meetings, and I wasn't part of them. And I didn't know the strategy of where the company is going. I didn't know the roadmap of the company. I didn't know the big deals that were happening. But that stuff to me was interesting. Maybe not everybody's like that. But to me, I kind of wanted to be on the inside. I wanted to be one of the guys that knew what was going on. And, I was only 20 or so at the time. And so, I wasn't in any position to be doing that. These guys were the ones running the company. But I, as an employee of the company, I wanted to know what was up. I wanted to be on the inside. I wanted to be on the in. I wanted to feel like I was participating. I wasn't ready to participate. I didn't know the company, anything about the business yet. I was learning, but just going into it, I remember thinking that way. And then as I grew within the company, more was revealed to me, and I eventually was, pulled into a lot of stuff, and I knew what was going on, and I didn't know everything ever, but I knew a lot, and as I had been there for a couple years, more and more was revealed to me. Well, here's where I'm going with this. So if you've ever had any employee experiences as an employee, really think about what you hated. I think that's just critical. I think about what I hated. In fact, I think that it's worth orchestrating in your business a level where a certain part of the team is on the outside and a certain part of the team is on the inside. And I don't mean that in a negative way. From that experience, I learned that, and it just simply doesn't make sense to reveal too much to everybody anyway. But I think people should be motivated to want to be on the inside. Not everybody even cares, and that's fine. Not everybody you're going to hire even cares. But when you're hiring some top players as you're growing your company, you want guys to have a reason to want to be on the inside, to be one of the main five or the main people, to know what's going on. And I think everybody in the company needs to know the roadmap of the company, where you're going. Everybody needs to understand the agenda and be working towards it. But what I mean by that is, not everybody needs to know about every deal. Not everybody needs to know about every problem. There's a lot of stuff that goes on that in my lawn care company that only 3 people know about, and I'm one of them. There's other things that 8 people know about, and there's other things that the whole company needs to know about. And so I think there's some value in creating this desire within the company where people want to do more, perform better, achieve more, so they can move into that upper area. And so that's just a little tidbit that I experienced. I also experienced a lot of frustration around being told one thing and seeing something else. Something else happen. I also see a lot of companies where the owner's just a jerk. He gets pissed off, and he's a jerk. That's bad stuff. You want to be aware of that. Or guys that cuss at their people, or cuss at their employees, or they have field workers and they kind of look down on them like they're lesser. Man, these guys are the guys doing the work. These guys are not lesser, is my attitude. They're just doing a different job, and you got to take care of them. So employees want to feel like they're part of the team. They want to feel like you actually care about them. And a lot of owners, as they get bigger, get completely disconnected from what a guy goes through 50, 60 hours a week out in the field at 100-degree weather or in the middle of the winter while he's plowing snow. They totally forget because they haven't done it in years. They become completely unrealistic, and I think it's extremely dangerous because employees lose respect for somebody that is just seems extremely disconnected from reality. So where I'm going with all this is that I think these are really important concepts from being a good owner manager. And they're all easier said than done because a lot of times we get so busy and we don't realize, the dumb things we're doing as owners. And I know I do it all the time. And it's just it's really, really important to communicate with the team. But at the same time, I don't think everything should be revealed to everybody. I do think everybody should have a feel of how the company's going. But also, there's a lot of times that some bad news should absolutely not be shared with the rest of the team. There's nothing they can do to affect it. There's nothing they can do to change it. So for some personality types, all it will do is beat them down, stress them out, and make them worry. And it's completely unnecessary to share it because it might make you feel better to talk about it, but it will do nothing to improve the company. Regarding client lists and such, there's only so much you can protect that stuff, in my opinion, because you've got to give your team the ability to be very good at customer service. And I think at some level, there's only so much you can hide in the company, only so much you can keep hidden, because simply exposing information and knowledge and teaching and training to your team is the only way they're going to be very good at customer service. So I find it very, very difficult to even bother trying to hide the client list. But I do see some value in hiding some of the pricing. But even then, a lot of times to let your team really support the client, they need to be able to see some of that stuff. So I'm less concerned about some of that stuff, but there are certainly people in the company that if they're just doing mailers, marketing mailers, or they're just doing other tasks in the business like answering the phone and immediately sending that call on, by all means, I think all that stuff should be hidden. And so, but I at the same time think that there's real wisdom in your core team letting them know the numbers of the company. I think there's real value. You got to be careful with this, though, but I think there's value in the very core part of the team letting them know the P&L of the business. When you move down a little further in the business, there's a risk of letting everybody know the P&L. Like, for example, and there's absolute risk of letting anybody know employee salaries, because a lot of times they will not understand the cost behind the scenes. So they might see somebody that's making a big salary, or you as an owner making a big salary, or maybe one of your salespeople makes a big salary. And a lot of the very best companies out there, the very top salesperson makes more than the owner. And so not always in lawn care, but in some other industries. And so outsiders that don't understand, that see a salesperson or an owner making a lot more money than they do, or sometimes if they don't know salaries and they see, oh, the company made $5 million, they think, oh, the owner's like getting totally rich here and he's got so much money. Well, a lot of times they don't have any idea of the costs that go into the business. They have no comprehension of what's involved in the risk and the tax management behind the scenes. And so they just perceive that as these huge sums of money are being deposited into the owner's bank account, when in reality that may not be the case, because you're managing taxes and cash flow and growth and everything else. So there's a point there where certain people should be shown that because they can actually affect it, and other people it should be completely hidden from and not talked about because all they're going to hear is the big number. And unless they're trained to really understand how the company works, they can't possibly understand that they basically can't possibly understand that a $5 million business does not mean the owner's taking home $2 million a year. And in most cases, not even $1 million. So my point is that you've got to be careful with who you show it to. So if you're going to do kind of an open book philosophy on your business, then you have to be prepared to highly educate your team. So if you're going to lay out for them all of this information about the business, then you've got to be ready to fully educate them so that they can read the P&L and understand it and know the realities of behind the scenes, how much money is really being made and how much money is really being left in the company and things of that sort. So The more people you expose this information to, the more people you have to train. If you're not going to train them, don't show it. So I generally am not opposed to letting some pricing information and client lists be shown to the support team, but then hide it from obviously crews and things of that sort. So it's just a judgment call on a case-by-case basis on how much information you expose. But going back to the experience of the employee, I wanted to feel like I was part of the team. I wanted to contribute. And if information was shown to me and I was taught how to use it and what it meant, then I could better help the company. So that's the big takeaway here is the more you expose, the more you teach the right people, the more they can actually contribute to your company. Last thing you want to do is bring in a $75,000 a year employee, hide everything from them, and take away their power and ability to do what's best for the company, make wise, sound financial decisions. So in some cases, it does make sense to show that information. But in terms of a true P&L, I generally say that's only reserved for a few core people in the company to see, because the training and education's not going to be done to teach everybody else about what that really means. And so I do also believe that department heads should have P&Ls. I believe that a manager of a division should be responsible for his P&L, and he should be taught it, and he should know it. So I do believe in that. But the P&L doesn't need to go any further than that. It doesn't need to go down to like the person answering the telephone. That's it, they can't affect it generally. So why even go that direction? So that's my take on numbers. I will answer a whole bunch more questions next month. Thanks. Have a great night, and thank you everybody for that hopped on this call. I'm going to post this call on Lawn Care Millionaire and the video. There's a comment section below it. If you'll comment, if you'll ask questions there, I will respond to them right there on the web so everybody can see them. So I've never done this before. I have no idea if anybody would be interested in doing this, but if you have questions or comments, comment on this post. I'll post it in the next couple days. Ask your questions, comments there. If I said something and you've personally had alternative experience, and you've got good recommendations, please put them out there. If you want to complain or argue about something or anything like that, please don't post it. I would like to keep it very positive, and I don't care to complain about the industry or complain about the future of the industry or complain about anything. Let's just, I'd like to keep it positive, ask questions, and if you've got some great advice that might help another person, that'd be awesome to post out there. And anyway, thank you for listening, and thanks for all your interest. See you next month.